and see these two figures in the same sign rooms, especially in Sri Lanka. So maybe paradoxical or sometimes contradiction. Well, we listen to both them, what they are going to offer to our audience today. We are eagerly waiting to listen to you on this topic. Thank you so much, and all are very welcome.
Thank you very much, Bhanti. To kick off, then I'd like to just start with some introductions and invite Graham Dixon to introduce our main keynote speaker, please.
Sujatha Meegama is a distinguished art historian and educator, specializing in the visual cultures of South and Southeast Asia, with a particular focus on Sri Lanka. Currently, the Robert N.H. Ho Family Foundation Senior Lecturer in Buddhist Art History at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, Dr. Meegama brings over a decade of international experience as an academic to her role. She earned her PhD in the history of art from the University of California, Berkeley, following graduate work at Stanford and undergraduate studies at Temple University's Tokyo campus, a true international scholar. Dr. Meegama's research explores the intersections of art, architecture, and religion, with an emphasis on transnational artistic exchanges across the Indian Ocean. Her recent monograph, Temples to the Buddha and the Gods, exemplifies her commitment to an interdisciplinary approach to art history. In addition to her academic work, Dr. Meegama has curated exhibitions highlighting contemporary Sri Lankan art. Her activities extend to committee membership with the United Kingdom Association of Buddhist Studies and the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Sri Lanka, reflecting her dedication to advancing the field both within and beyond academe. Dr. Meegama, we are very fortunate to have you with us this evening. I hand the microphone to you.
Good evening and good morning, good afternoon to also those of you who are online joining us from different parts of the world. It's really a privilege to be here tonight at the London Buddhist Vihara and to share my research on Sri Lankan temples with all of you today. And thank you, Graham, for that generous introduction. Thanks to you. For the past 2 years, we've, as students at the Courtauld in the MA Buddhist Heritage, we've been welcomed to Chidinstan Castle to study the Buddhist art in your collection. I also want to take a moment to thank Amal Abewardena for inviting me to do this first book talk. And of course, Venerable Stila Vimala, along with the London Buddhist Vihara monastic community, for giving me this opportunity to share my research with the Buddhist community of this Vihara. This is the first collaboration between the Courtauld's Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Center for Buddhist Art, History and Conservation and the British Mahabodhi Society and the London Buddhist Vihara. And it has been a long time in the making. In spring 2023, a few months after we had restarted the MA in Buddhist Heritage at the Courtauld, when I was still new to London, Amal helped us to publicize our first lecture series on Sri Lanka's heritage. And some of you came to the Courtauld, to our Vernon Square campus, and supported us by attending our talks. And we are very grateful to you for joining us during that lecture series. And I just want to give a big shout out to my former colleague, Laurie Wong, who is here in the audience with us, who helped me to organize that lecture series and who also organized a study trip to Sri Lanka in our very first year in May 2023. We took our students, our very first cohort of students, on an amazing study trip to Sri Lanka for 2 weeks, and to some of the sites that I'll be talking to you about today. Hopefully this collaboration will continue between the Courtauld and the Mahabodhi Society and the London Buddhist Vihara. But let me now turn to the book. The seeds of this book project were planted over 20 years ago when I first saw these two temples, Gadladini Rajamahavihara and Lankatilaka Rajamahavihara, with my parents when we took a road trip around the island.
Okay. These slides are not showing on the screen.
Yeah, we are. Okay.
Okay, I got it. I got it. Now I need to take that off the. People on Zoom are seeing your slides, but we're not seeing them on the slide. Okay, so just a minute. Your screen sharing.
Okay.
Yep. What did I do?
Was on share. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. So these are the challenges of doing hybrid events, but I'm always in awe of Amal and his team to be able to do this type of hybrid events. So as I was saying, I saw these temples for the first time over nearly 20 years ago. And I was taking this road trip around the island with my parents. I had briefly returned to Sri Lanka after nearly 10 years away from Sri Lanka, and seeing both Gadladenia and Lankatilak changed my life. I thought I was going to do my PhD in Japanese Buddhist art history. I had completed my MA in Japanese studies and studied the language, and I had like a topic in mind to pursue this PhD, but I just couldn't forget these two temples. And at that time, very few were also working on Sri Lanka's art histories. And although Sri Lanka is in the center of the Indian Ocean, which has the world's oldest transoceanic long-distance trading system, Sri Lanka's art histories have rarely received the attention it deserves. So let's dive into the book. What is this book about? Temples to the Buddha and the gods examines the patronage of temples in Sri Lanka, as well as the use of a specific architectural tradition that is seen across the Indian Ocean world from the pre-modern to the contemporary. The Dravida tradition of architecture has generally been associated with kovils or Hindu temples. So you can see here that not only is it seen in South Asia, but also in Southeast Asia, as well as here in London. In the writings about Sri Lanka's art history, this architectural tradition has been seen as foreign, and temples built in this architectural tradition have not always been included in the island's art historical canon. And yet my book argues that the Dravida tradition of architecture has an important place in Sri Lanka's art histories. It was appropriated by different patrons and architects to build 3 different types of image houses in Sri Lanka. And you can see a couple on the screen right now. Not just Hindu, but also Buddhist. These different types of image houses, the kovil, the viharage or the pilimage, and the devale, have generally been studied in isolation and not placed in dialogue with each other. While the Buddhist pilimage houses images of the Buddha, the Hindu kovil is home to the Hindu gods. The devale too is similarly a house for gods, but the Hindu, Mahayana, and local gods who are enshrined in such a temple are worshipped as Buddhist guardian deities. My book brings these different types of temples together for the first time to attempt to understand the shared architectural practices and the shared patterns of patronage between different religious and ethnic communities. Drawing on the fruits of research in a number of fields, especially Buddhist studies, this project not only uses visual evidence, but it also uses inscriptions, chronicles, and Buddhist poetry to draw attention to these 3 types of temple spaces that share an architectural tradition and to unveil the diversity of patrons who are building these temples. I've given you a sort of a brief overview of a couple of issues at stake in this book: patronage, as well as a shared patronage pattern, as well as a shared architectural tradition within 3 very different types of temples. The book consists of 4 chapters, an introduction and a conclusion. We won't be able to go through all of them, the chapters today, but I'm going to dip into 2 chapters today to contrast 2 very different sites and stories about patronage and the transmission of this architectural tradition, to give you a sense of some of my findings about temples in Sri Lanka. We will begin our journey at the World Heritage City of Polonnaruwa and then move to Gadladeniya, a village outside of Kandy, to focus on the magnificent temple of Gadladeniya. Some of you may have heard of these sites or been to these sites. How about a quick show of hands for those of you who have been to Polonnaruwa?
Yeah, we've all
A
been,
number of
dear.
you have been to
We've all
Polonnaruwa,
been.
yes. How about to Gadladeniya? Oh, a few have, yes. Well, if you haven't been there, which is sort of like the majority of the audience here, if you haven't been to Gadladeniya or Lankatilaka, I would suggest that you buy a ticket and go this summer to see these 2 temples. So let's begin with Polonnaruwa. Nestled amidst the large stupas and the monumental image houses for the Buddha are 16 small Hindu temples or kovils. They were built for Hindu deities at Polonnaruwa from around the late 10th through the 12th centuries, initially by South Indian Chola patrons during the Chola occupation of the Rajaraja region. Even though there's a longer history of Hindu temples in Sri Lanka, especially at seaports, and I'm here thinking of the northeastern and the northern seaports on the eastern and western seacoasts, that's the 2 temples at Trincomalee, Turikoneswaram, and then in Mana Tirukethiswaram. It was the Hindu temples in Polonnaruwa that were patronized by local Buddhist kings when they returned to power in 1070, and that also inspired the architectural forms of monumental Buddhist image houses in Polonnaruwa. Let's take a look at one of these small kovils that possibly inspired the monumental Buddhist image houses at Polonnaruwa. Now called Shiva Devalaya number 2, the oldest of the temples at Polonnaruwa boasts 5 Tamil inscriptions from this time period on its walls and basement moldings. From these inscriptions, we begin to piece together some sense of how this first Hindu temple at Polonnaruwa functioned at this Chola center. First, we learned that the temple was possibly established during the reign of Rajendra I, that is Rajaraja's son. Rajaraja is the king who invades the Rajarat region in 998 CE. He's invading from South India, and it's his son who takes over after him. 2 inscriptions carved on the southern wall reveal that the temple was called Vanavan Madhevi Iswaram Udayar Kovil. It was named after one of Rajaraja's queens, Vanavan Madhevi, or Rajendra's mother. In addition to this royal affiliation, the other donor inscriptions associated with this temple indicate that this very same Shiva Devalaya number 2 was also patronized by non-royalty. Another inscription records the donation of a lamp and some money, whilst one more mentions the donation of 25 cows for the supply of oil to burn lamps. Inscriptions at Shiva Devalaya number 2 list the names and roles of various people involved in the day-to-day maintenance of this temple, from Brahmins to temple workers, such as drummers and dancers. When you visit Polonnaruwa, make it a point to visit this small temple on a Tuesday or a Friday, as it still functions as a living heritage site. There are only 2 sites in Polonnaruwa that function as living heritage sites, and we had the privilege of experiencing that when we took our students. And this is the Shiva Devalaya number 2, where you can experience a puja, and also, of course, the Galvihara, where you can experience the evening puja, which is absolutely beautiful. Buddhist kings at Polonnaruwa continued this new patronage pattern, that is, constructing temples to gods by sponsoring image houses to gods in Polonnaruwa and beyond. Such patterns indicate that the patronage of temples to Hindu gods had begun to play a central role in new ideals of kingship that was introduced by South Indian rulers to the island. When we look at patterns of patronage at Polonnaruwa, there are 3 Buddhist monarchs who stand up prominently as patrons of religious monuments, both Buddhist and Hindu, at this royal center: Vijayabahu I, Parakrambahu I, and Nisankamalla. Different textual sources reveal that all 3 continued to patronize temples to the gods in Polonnaruwa and beyond. Today, I'll briefly share about one Buddhist king's activities, since we need to cover quite a bit. The Chulavamsa, a Pali chronicle, devotes 4 chapters to the life of Vijayabahu I. And Vijayabahu I is the king who returns to power after battling with the Chola kings. And in the Chulavamsa, we hear quote about Vijayabahu: "Of that which was formerly spent for the shrines of the gods, he took nothing away," end of quote. In other words, Vijayabahu I, the first local Buddhist king after the Chola occupation, continued the patronage that temples to gods had previously received from Chola patrons during the Chola occupation of Rajarata. Inscriptions too carve an image of Vijayabahu as a king who patronized not only temples to gods at Polonnaruwa, but also at a Shaivite center in Kantale, which is northeast of Polonnaruwa. Apart from a recently constructed kovil, which you can see on the screen, there are very few archaeological remains at this site. But donations to this particular shrine or this site by multiple royal donors are recorded. Vijayabahu's grandson, Gajabahu II, was a patron. The third great Buddhist patron of Polonnaruwa, Nissankamalla, donated the Parvati Alms Hall to this site. Although outside the royal city of Polonnaruwa, it was clearly a temple site, important enough to receive multiple royal donations for over 100 years. Now that we've thought about the patrons and their inscriptions, let's take a look at the physical structure of Shiva Devala number 2 and think about how it may have impacted the forms of monumental Buddhist temples that were constructed at Polonnaruwa. So what consists of the Dravida architectural tradition? The architectural features generally seen in the Dravida architectural tradition consist of a vimana, or the main shrine. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this part is generally considered the vimana, or the main shrine. I hope that those of you who are in person can see my cursor, and those of you who are online can see it as well. And I've also tried to put in some gigantic arrows as well to give you a sense of what I'm describing, as so that you get a fairly good idea what the Dravida architectural tradition is, because we're going to be thinking about this throughout the talk today, and we're going to be thinking about it not only at Polonnaruwa, but also when we get to Gadladenia. So apart from the vimana, or the main shrine, we have this superstructure, which of course, has this number of tiers, and it's also embellished by this row of pavilions. They're called kutas. At the end of the four corners, you have 4 kutas, and in the middle, you have something called a shala. And the exterior walls are ornamented by these pilasters, including these niches, which you'll hear a little bit more about when we start looking at the Buddhist temples. And supporting all of this are these basement moldings, and they have specific patterns that tell us, give us a sense of the identity of the different workshops that were working at Polonnaruwa. And I just forgot to mention one other element of the Dravida architecture tradition, and this is the cornice. The cornice has this tiny little horseshoe-shaped sort of motifs, the kudus, and you sort of generally tend to see a combination of these different architectural features in a temple that's built in this particular architectural tradition. Hindu and Buddhist temples at Polonnaruwa have usually been seen in previous scholarship as distinct and separate from each other in terms of patronage, production, religion, architecture, material, and location. But a comparison of the superstructures and the wall ornamentation of these small kovils and the 3 monumental Buddhist image houses at Polonnaruwa reveal that the producers of the monumental Buddhist temples that you currently see on the screen may have been inspired by these small Hindu temples and their Dravida architectural tradition. Of the 3 monumental Buddhist pilgrimages of Polonnaruwa, the Tuparama temple is the only image house that has retained its superstructure from the Polonnaruwa period. Although the pattern on the basement moldings indicates a workshop not trained in the Dravida tradition, the frieze of lions echo the Vyala figures seen on the basement moldings of another temple called Shiva Devala number 1. And when I say the frieze of lions, I hope again you can see my cursor. It's here at the bottom on the basement moldings of the Tuparama. In fact, the superstructure and wall ornamentation clearly reveal that the producers of this temple appropriated the Dravida tradition seen at the Hindu temples in Polonnaruwa. The superstructure consists of the 4-faceted dome in the center, similar to the dome that you find on the superstructure at Shiva Devala number 1. It also has on its the periphery kutas and shalas, similar to the superstructure that you have on Shiva Devala number 2. This pattern of placing a dome in the center of the roof and then placing kutas and shalas on the periphery is similar to that of the superstructure at both Shivadevalaya number 1 and number 2. And if you, sorry, I just was ahead of myself. Directly below these pavilions that you find on the periphery of this superstructure, you find these miniature shrines on the exterior walls, ornamenting the exterior walls. And again, you see in these miniature shrines, similar sort of superstructures that are similar to these Shivadevalaya number 1 and number 2. This approach to temple ornamentation was expanded upon by local workshops at the remaining 2 monumental image houses at Polonnaruwa, Lanka Tilaka and Tivankapilamage, with bodhisattva-like figures occupying the miniature shrines. Figures of Hindu deities did occupy certain niches at Shivadevalaya number 1, another Hindu temple at Polonnaruwa. In this manner, we see different ways of engagement with the Dravida tradition of architecture by the makers of these monumental Buddhist image houses at Polonnaruwa. This brief comparison between the Hindu temples and the Buddhist image house at Polonnaruwa reveal a shared architectural tradition between monuments that have often been seen as separate. The post-Chola period has been solely seen as a Buddhist Renaissance. Yet a comparison of the temples to Hindu gods initially constructed by Chola patrons with the subsequent temples built for the Buddha in Polonnaruwa by Buddhist kings argues for a more nuanced understanding of the histories of Hindu and Buddhist image houses of the medieval city of Polonnaruwa. By studying both Hindu temples and Buddhist temples at Polonnaruwa simultaneously, along with their inscriptions, I began to understand that Buddhist kings modeled themselves after the Cholas, adopting a new ideal of kingship in which patronage of deities through temple building played a central role. Bringing together different types of temples that are usually not seen as sharing any patronage or architectural connections enriches our understanding of how patronage practices and the construction of temples worked on the ground in Sri Lanka. This section hopefully gave you a sense of how combining temple architecture, chronicles, and inscriptions can give us a more nuanced picture of different temples at a World Heritage Site. Next, I'd like to share my discoveries about a site that is not very well known. That's Gadladenia. And my book also, apart from beginning at Polonnaruwa and focusing on this World Heritage Site and looking at temples, both Buddhist and Hindu, at Polonnaruwa, it also brings attention to the significance of image houses built after the fall of the 2 dry zone civilizations, that is after Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa. Now, why do I do this? One of the reasons I do this is the time period that comes after Polonnaruwa is generally painted as this period or this era of decline. But these 2 magnificent temples from the Gampala period, Gadladeni Rajamahavihara and Lankatilaka Rajamahavihara, both constructed in 1344 in the same year in the central highlands of Sri Lanka, clearly call into question this so-called era of decline. In fact, these 2 temples illustrate the ways in which the architecture and religious practices on this island dramatically changed in the 1300s, leading to a new temple culture. It is in this time period that Buddhism, in the form which it has come down to modern times, attained many of its characteristics. But these 2 temples were not built by Buddhist kings. They were built by a Buddhist monk and a chief minister of the Gampala kingdom. Due to the literary and cultural influence of the 2 Pali chronicles, the Mahavamsa and the Chulavamsa, which sing praises of ideal Buddhist kings and their pious activities, temple patronage in Sri Lanka has largely been seen as the purview of Buddhist monarchs. The Pali Chronicle indicates the various types of gifts ranging from religious sculptures and paintings to stupas, temples, and monasteries donated to the Sasana or the monastic order by Buddhist kings. However, a closer look at diverse textual sources reveals that, in fact, a wider variety of patrons than previously believed participated in temple building on this island. Gadladeni Rajamahawihara has at least 8 inscriptions carved onto the surface of the rock in which the temple is built on, as well as onto slabs of stones within the temple precincts. The earliest Sinhala inscription from
coming.
1344 at Gadladeni tells of a religious community headed by a Buddhist monk, Silavamsa Dhammakirti, who had galvanized support from various high-ranking persons in order to build an image house for the Buddha and for Devraja, the local god. The inscription states that Dharmakirti, quote, was born in the family of Ganavasi, which has come to the island of Sri Lanka, bringing the holy Mahabodhi tree, end of quote. That is the tree under which the Buddha attained enlightenment. In addition to this inscription at Gadladeni, various literary works from the Gampala period shed light on this extraordinary cosmopolitan and erudite monk, teacher, and temple patron. These include Dharmakirti's own compositions, as well as those written by his students and successive students. Both the Gadladeni inscription and a work by one of Dharmakirti's student mention the construction of a stone temple by Dharmakirti in South India. The Gadladeni inscription states, quote, His Holiness Dharmakirti Stavira restored a 2-storied image house at Sri Dhanyakataka in Dhammadeva II by spending much gold and jewels, end of quote. Both the temple in South India and the Gadladeni temple were made in stone. Perhaps the image house in Sri Dhanyakataka inspired Dharmakirti to build a similar one in stone in Sri Lanka. This narrative about temple patronage points to a significant way in which the newly emergent Sri Lankan elites of this time period, like the monk Dharmakirti and the minister Sena Lankadikara who built Lankatilaka, styled themselves as patrons of enormous wealth, piety, and power during this age of trade and travel to support temples not only in Sri Lanka but also in South India. After his pious activities in the subcontinent, Dhammakirti is believed to have returned to Sri Lanka. There he was based at a temple called Alavatura Ganegoda Vihara, a cave temple in Beligal Korale in the Kayagala district, that also shares certain architectural elements with Gadladeni. Wherever he moved, he seemed to have sponsored a temple, revealing his elite status and means. Now, while residing at Gadladeni, Dharmakirti became the Sangha Raja, a supreme patriarch of Sri Lanka's Sangha, or community of Buddhist monks. The Mayura Sandesha, or the Peacock's Message, a long poem of 163 verses written during the reign of King Bhuvanakabahu V, notes that Dharmakirti was the Sangha Raja. Dharmakirti's student, Jayabahu's Nikaya Sangrahaya, states that in 1369, Dharmakirti presided over convocation of the Sangha, sponsored by the royal minister Nisanka Alagakkuwanara. Such purifications were meant to uphold the Sangha, who had been unified in the Polonnaruwa period through King Parakramabahu's efforts. Although Dharmakirti venerated Devraja through his construction of a temple to this god, he was seen as worthy of continuing and leading these efforts to purify the Sangha. Neither his association with the Vanavasa fraternity or the forest-dwelling group of monks, nor his many Buddhist compositions, nor his ecclesiastical position as Sangha Raja prevented Dharmakirti from including the then most popular god on the island in his groundbreaking 14th century stone temple to the Buddha and a guardian deity. Now that you've got a sense of this amazing patron, let's take a brief look at the type of temple this Buddhist monk built. The temple houses a large image of the seated Buddha within its main sanctum. What's really remarkable about Gadladeni and reflective of the profound changes taking place in this time period is that unlike previous Buddhist temples on the island, it features a second sanctum dedicated to the indigenous guardian deity known as Devraja, or the king of the gods. And here I just want to show you on the screen, you can see not only a photograph of the temple, but also a ground plan. And you can see, hopefully with my cursor, that there are two sanctums. One that houses a large seated image of the Buddha, and another that has an image or an ornament or the weapon of this deity then called Upulvan. Now he's called Vishnu. 4 lengthy Sandesha poems written in the Gampolo and Kotte periods reveal the popularity of this guardian deity, who has been variously interpreted by scholars as Varuna, Rama, and Vishnu. Also known as Upulvan, Devaraja's main temple was situated in the southernmost point of the island, at the port city of Devinuvara. Although the temple to Upulvan at Devinuvara was located near Buddhist temples, the sanctum was not within a Buddhist image house. Gadladeniya and Lankatilaka were the first extant Buddhist temples to include gods to be worshipped inside the Buddhist image house. At both Gadladeniya and Lankatilaka, we also see these features called Makara Toranas. And the Makara Torana is it's sort of like a arch or a gate above the seated Buddha's head, and you can see different deities peering down, sort of taking this protective stance above the Buddha. These deities are mentioned in the inscriptions from 1344. So they weren't added later on, but were there from 1344. Although Gadladeniya is far away from the port city of Devinuvara, it would seem that Upulvan, or Devaraja's inclusion by Dharmakirti, was deliberate, allowing an expansion of religious belief and practice by Buddhist monks and their lay communities, rather than only by monarchs, as was the case at Polonnaruwa. The single inscription at Lankatilaka Rajamahavihara, built in central Sri Lanka in 1344, the same year as the nearby Gadladeniya temple, shows that the inclusion of local and pan-Indic deities inside Buddhist temples was supported by the two main fraternities, the Vanavasa, or the forest dwelling, and the Ganavasa, or the Gamavasa, or the village dwelling of the Sangha that had developed by this time. The singular rock inscription of King Bhuvanagabahu IV notes that the Lankatilaka monastery, including its image house, was constructed together with the Mahasangha, i.e. Buddhist monks of both communities. Both forest-dwelling and village-dwelling monks participated in building new types of image houses dedicated to both the Buddha and local and pan-Indic deities. Messenger poems, or sandeshas, were written around the same time period when these changes were occurring in Buddhist temples. During the Gampolo and Kotte periods, 7 sandeshas were written to gods that engaged Buddhist monks in various ways, as writers of poems to deities, as recipients of messenger poems, as receivers of blessings from gods, and as intermediaries between devotees and gods. Some of the monks who were writing these poems were not well known, but others were famous and powerful. Of course, all these observations about the participation of Buddhist monks in praising local and pan-Indic deities and including them in Buddhist temples beg the question, why? The main goal of Buddhism, to achieve nirvana, had not changed. But, as evidenced in these poems, Buddhist monks did not use appeals to gods to help their devotees reach nirvana. Instead, they directly engaged in the affairs of this world, often interceding on behalf of political leaders for their protection. Although this new phenomenon of Buddhist monks venerating gods has been acknowledged previously, the support of Buddhist monks in patronizing guardian deities through temple building practices is a noteworthy moment in the history of Buddhism in Sri Lanka. Temples, inscriptions, and texts clearly show that the inclusion of local and pan-Indic deities inside Buddhist temples was supported by both groups of monastic elites. The temples and these textual sources also indicate that the worship of the Buddha and local and pan-Indic deities in the same religious space originated in the Gampolo period, with learned monastics of both fraternities and not necessarily with Buddhist monarchs. Now that we've gotten a sense of who the patron is and the kind of image house that he constructed, let's look at Dharmakirti's collaboration with a South Indian architect. Gadladeniya's main image house has always been viewed through the lens of South Indian influence. If we examine Gadladeniya's main image house from top to bottom, we see that each of the two Vimanas is crowned by a dome. And if you recall, the Vimana is the main shrine, right? And you can see that at Gadladeniya there are two, right? And there are two domes. And here is the frontal view, and here is a side view of one of the domes of the main shrines. The next story of the main temple's large superstructure consists of a row of small pavilions. So similar to Tuparama at Polonnaruwa, we see that at Gadladeniya as well, this Buddhist image house, we see these row of pavilions, the kutas, the panjaras, the shalas, ornamenting the superstructure. And there's a row of vyalas, or this row of lions. And I think I have a better shot of this. Yes, here is this dome, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we think about how Dharmakirti negotiated with Ganeshwarachari on constructing this temple. But here I just wanted to show a close-up of what I mean by these pavilions, these kutas, shalas, and the panjaras that you see across the pavilion ornament in the superstructure. We also see a row of vyalas on the pavilion, a row of lions, which we also see generally in South Indian Dravida architectural tradition temples. And you can see that the cornice also has this kudus, or these horseshoe-shaped architectural features. And the facades or the exterior walls of the temples have these pilasters, very typical Dravida pilasters ornamenting the walls, along with niches. And the niches, of course, they don't contain images of bodhisattvas or Hindu deities. They're too shallow to contain them. The basement moldings that we see here, and here's a close-up of it, is also of a very specific sequence that tells us that the workshop was a Dravida tradition workshop, possibly coming from South India. And the pillars that we see on either side at the entrance pavilion, they're composite pillars consisting of small, square, and octagonal colonnades. They're very similar to some of the pillars that you can see in South Indian Hindu temples in South India. So at Gadladeniya, apart from these architectural features that clearly show that they were created in the Dravida tradition of architecture, the presence of a South Indian architect is also recorded in the patron's rock inscription from 1344 CE. Dhammakirti, the inscription states, Dhammakirti caused to be built on the expanse of flat rock called the Gala, between the two towns of Singaruvana, a 3-storied image house by engaging master artisans, at whose head was Ganeshwarachari, the chief of the Guild of Sculptors, who was well versed in such arts as architecture and image making, end of quote. From this inscription, we understand that the leading architect was Sthapati Ganeshwarachari, the Ganadipati, or the head of a guild. Gana refers to a guild. The clause that introduces the architect also states that they knew Vastu Shastra and Pratima Shastra. In other words, they knew about architecture treatises and image practices as well. The inscription clearly frames the makers of this monument as those who possess Shastric knowledge and were part of a specialized guild. From the name Ganeshwarachari, scholars have also assumed this individual to be of South Indian origin. It is in fact the name Sthapati that appears before the name Ganeshwarachari that can clearly tell us that this was an architect from Tamil Nadu. It provides another clue to his identity and further supports the theory that Gadladeni was a collaboration between a Sri Lankan Buddhist monk and an architect from Tamil Nadu. Although architectural features and inscription at Gadladeni characterize the temple as being built in the South Indian architectural tradition, a careful visual analysis reveals that this is not a wholesale copy lifted from Tamil Nadu. In it, we can see the desires of a Buddhist patron at work. As noted earlier, unlike any previous image houses created in Sri Lanka or in Tamil Nadu for that matter, Gadladeni has an unusual ground plan, which combines a Vimana for the Buddha and a smaller one dedicated to the local deity, Devaraja. The structure has two entrances. The larger image house dedicated to the Buddha faces northeast, while the smaller shrine to the guardian deity faces south. The Buddhist Vimana consists of a sanctum. So I hope you can see my cursor. It consists of a sanctum. It's got a vestibule and an enclosed hall. And it's entered through this porch where you have these interesting pillars on either side. The Vimana dedicated to the guardian deity, that has a sanctum, an enclosed vestibule, and you enter that from this other entranceway. Well, this is the first extant instance in Sri Lanka of a local deity being incorporated into a Buddhist temple to be worshipped. The Buddha has nonetheless been accorded greater prominence than the local guardian deity in both the architectural plan and in its visual components. The superstructure also presents evidence that Gadladeni is not solely a temple built in the Dravida tradition. As mentioned earlier, domical roofs are placed over the two Vimanas, which you can see on both the above the Buddha's the statue as well as the Vishnu Devalaya. The north-facing niche of the dome of the main shrine is pierced through to the interior, and you can see that in this particular photograph that there's a small opening here. The 1344 inscription of this site notes, quote, "In the cell of the Chaitya on the topmost story, he caused," that is Dhammakirti, caused to be made an image of the Buddha, depicting him seated, delivering the discourse on the Abhidhamma, on the throne Pandukambala under the Parijata tree, and attended by gods Shakra, Brahma, and others, end of quote. The window is accessible from below by way of an external staircase. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of that. And devotees presumably use this staircase to reach this chaitya, this dome, to be able to worship this sculpture that was inside. Sadly, of course, it's not extant any longer. Another striking feature of these two domes is that while the one above the main shrine is polygonal in form, the one above the smaller subsidiary shrine is reminiscent of the four-faceted domes typical of South Indian Hindu temples. The spires atop are different as well, as you can see. The one takes the form of a kotkarala, which you find typically on Buddhist stupas in Sri Lanka, while the spire on the dome above the deity of the subsidiary shrine is similar to those seen on Hindu temples in Tamil Nadu. In fact, the domical roof over the main shrine exhibits very stupa-like qualities. You've got this hemispherical dome, you've got the T-shape, the T-cube, the Hatharas Kotua, and the aforementioned Kotkarala is there as well. And the inscription calls this architectural element at the topmost story a chaitya, another term that can be used to refer to a stupa. This particular rendition of the dome above the Buddha image in the main sanctum combines a typical Buddhist structure, that's a stupa, and an architectural feature, the shikara, found in Hindu temples. Such visual details, without doubt carefully calculated, suggest a process of negotiation and accommodation between the Buddhist patron and the South Indian architect. Hollow domes housing religious images and paintings, and external staircases leading to the superstructure for possible circumambulation are generally not seen in Dravida Kovils in Tamil Nadu. Clearly, in creating Gadladenia, the South Indian architect took into consideration the needs of his Buddhist patron. The architecture at Gadladenia inspired other temples in the Kandyan region over the next few centuries. Stone-built temple architecture in the Dravida tradition was deployed for both Buddhist Pilamages and Devalas in the 14th and 15th centuries. In fact, similar temple structures can be seen at the Natha Devale, Adhanamaluva, Koppikaduva Vihara, and Palkumbara Vihara, clearly indicating a desire to merge the architectural form of the stupa with that of the image house, which was something that you see sort of very briefly in this time period. I've been timing ourselves, and I am at 40 minutes now, so I'm going to pass the mic to Elizabeth to respond and bring in the Buddhist context to this narrative. But just very quickly in conclusion, these two different sort of case studies addressed in my book demonstrates the various ways in which the transnational Dravida tradition of architecture was engaged in Sri Lanka for different types of monuments by different religious communities. It argues for the importance of the Dravida tradition that was used at temples that transformed image houses in Sri Lanka. And interestingly, it occurred at the same time period when, of course, Buddhism began to change as well. Although Buddhist monarchs have often been seen as agents of transformation, Buddhist monks too actively participated in building temples to the Buddha and the gods. And of course, there's a lot more to share with you, and I look forward to the question and answer session that we'll have after Dr. Elizabeth Harris responds. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujatha, for that fascinating lecture. It's opened up a whole world, or rather the intersection of different worlds, and provided context to understand places some of us have been fortunate enough to visit. I remember visiting exactly that temple about 15 years ago and being totally surprised to find the very prominent seated Buddha image, just as you showed it tonight, surrounded by Hindu deities. So thank you for that. We're also very, very pleased to have with us this evening Elizabeth Harris to discuss with Sujatha and to facilitate the general audience discussion. Professor Harris is an honorary senior research fellow at the Edward Cadbury Centre for the Public Understanding of Religion at the University of Birmingham. Before her retirement, she was professor in the Department of Theology, Philosophy and Religious Studies at Liverpool Hope University, where she specialised in Buddhist studies. And both her master's and PhD are from the University of Kelaniya in Sri Lanka. I understand she went there on a one-year scholarship and ended up staying 7 years. Such is the testament to Sri Lankan hospitality and indeed scholarship. So yes, I'm rather jealous, really. Having widely written on religion and conflict, Professor Harris is deeply committed to fostering interreligious understanding and encounter. Her publications have made significant contributions to the field. There's one book that I absolutely remember reading. It's really stayed in my mind strongly, which is Theravada Buddhism and the British Encounter, Religious, Missionary and Colonial Experience in 19th Century Sri Lanka. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. Elizabeth Harris is president of the UK Association of Buddhist Studies and serves as an international advisor to Society for Buddhist Christian Studies. We're also fortunate that despite all of that, she finds time to chair the UK-wide Buddhist Christian Dialogue Forum, bringing together a wide range of people, including the Venerable Srila Vimala and myself, for dialogue on a regular basis. So, Elizabeth and Sujatha, over to you.
So first of all, now is this on? Can everybody hear me? Right. So first of all, I will speak probably for about 10 minutes. Then I have a couple of questions for you, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So members of the monastic sangha, distinguished guests, everyone here, it's a tremendous privilege to be asked to respond to Sujatha's talk and to respond to what is a fantastic book. I think there are only about 2 copies here. It is a fantastic book. I'm perhaps not going to speak so much from Buddhist studies perspective, the post-colonial perspective. And I want to begin with 2 examples from the British colonial period that speak of boundaries and exclusive attitudes toward Buddhist holy places. The binaries present in these examples are contested in your study. Now, the first example is Valasingha Harish, Secretary of the Lanka Mahabodhi Society, who wrote of Anuradhapura in 1908. And he wrote this: "There is no other city upon the universe that has maintained its position as a sacred city, replete with sacred objects of diverse kinds, for a period of 2,200 years, except this city, the property of the Buddha Sasana, built and maintained by the Sinhalese nation." Now, I know you don't concentrate on Anuradhapura in the book, but I use him as an illustration. He was speaking at a time when there was conflict between Buddhists and the British administration over Anuradhapura, but particularly over some Buddhist revivalists saw as the pollution of the sacred spaces there, with administrative buildings, markets selling meat, and Christian, Muslim, and Hindu places of worship. And the words I've just quoted were part of a guide to that he wrote in 1908, arguing that the sacred spaces in Anuradhapura should be holy to Buddhists alone and not polluted by British colonialism or other religions. Second illustration is the writings of William Knighton, about whom I gave a paper at a conference last year. He came to Sri Lanka in 1843 to be principal of the new central school there, which had provision for the training of teachers as well. He was a pioneering educationalist, a novelist, and perhaps a part owner of or an overseer of coffee plantation. He was fascinated and attracted by Buddhism, but drew a strong distinction between Buddhism and Brahmanism. He presented as someone who reform it. He described Brahmanism, and I quote, as the most terrible and pernicious. Paul said the views of Hinduism held by Christians in India. Now, is this still working? Seems to be going on. But Buddhism for him was exceptional because of its ethics and the goodness that it promoted. But Hinduism was the complete, the two were essentially different. And his views were reinforced by the policies of the British when they collected census data that divided people according to religion and ethnicity. And it was also reinforced by the division that came in 19th century Sri Lanka between Aryan and Dravidian. The Sinhala people were Aryan because they had a language that... I knew something was going wrong with the mic. Let's see if this works. Is it better? I hope people on Zoom can hear as well. So yes, these divisions between the communities of Sri Lanka also reinforced by the division that grew up in the mentality of the British and Sri Lankans between the Aryan and Dravidians. Now, Sujatha, in this groundbreaking study, rightly contests these rigorous distinctions through examining architecture and evidence from inscriptions and the Sandesa poetry. And I think it's very significant that she uses this poetry as well, particularly poetry from the Gampala period, which was 1341 to 1415. So after presenting her data in the book, she stresses that her study, or you stress, Sujatha, I should really address you directly, not just she. You stress that your study questions dichotomous understandings of religious monuments along ethnic and religious divisions. You place within the same intellectual and spiritual space Buddhist lay patrons, members of the monastic Sangha, architects and traders from South India, and the transnational architectural tradition, the Dravida tradition, which was recognized across Asia eventually, wasn't it? But which began in India in about the 7th century. And in doing this, I think you serve Sri Lanka and serve the Sri Lanka diaspora in a very important way. I mean, I visited the 3 temples in the Kandyan region, which form the basis of the majority of chapters, Gadaladenia, Lankatilaka, and Ambake. And I'm sure many of you also have. And I've heard the view from guides and others that the first 2 particularly have foreign Hindu influence and so are not really Sinhala Buddhist. I've also visited Buddhist sites in the north of the country and again have heard guides, particularly speaking to Sinhala groups, that South Indians were invaders, were the desecrators of Buddhism. Now, no doubt there were invasions in Sri Lanka, certainly, yes. But the picture that you paint, Sujatha, is much more plausible and much more complex, pointing to what some scholars have called multi-religion and similar terms. I mean, you introduce us to Buddhist kings in Polonnaruwa who modeled themselves on the religious devotion of the Cholas and who patronized Hindu kovils. To Brahmins and Buddhist monks who worship the same gods, to a Buddhist chief minister who worked with an architect from Tamil Nadu, as you explained now, and of the idea that Kandyan architecture was really a product of transnational cooperation and influences. And this has a real message, I think, for interethnic relations in Sri Lanka. And yes, between the fundamental kind of possibility of coexistence, mutual enrichment between Tamil and Sinhala spiritualities and craftsmen. And you also point to Asia at this time that you look at as a melting point of cultural and religious exchange, and Sri Lanka as being, at the center of this transnational hub. I mean, some historians have traced Sri Lanka's history from the 16th century onwards, with the main stress on Sri Lanka's relationships with Portugal, then the Netherlands, and then the British, ignoring the country's ongoing transnational connections with other parts of Asia. Now, scholars such as Anne Blackburn have contested this in her biography of Hikkaduwa Sumangala. There's a scholar in Cambridge University, Sujit Sivasundaram, who has done this also in his historical writings. And you add to this, stressing that Sri Lanka's history must be seen through the lenses of the whole of South Asia, not in terms of the domination of one group by another, but in terms of reciprocity, mutual influences, trading relationships, and so on. An art and architecture that was not spread through conquest and war, but through consent, through attraction, through reciprocity. So I'd really like to thank you for your work on this. The book's meticulously researched. I can't possibly comment on all the architectural details and the whole of your academic formation in architecture and art. I'm not the expert there, but it's fantastic. And you also raise questions that go far beyond Sri Lanka and the Sri Lanka diaspora, which is important for the study of culture in general. And for me, some of the most important questions were these. What is foreign? What is indigenous? What is the benefit of cultural exchange? How do cultures grow, enrich themselves, and change? And one message of the book is that this is not through turning inwards, but through being open to true cultural exchange. And so the book, through the study of architecture, has a message about historical method, the formation of cultures and cultural exchange that goes far beyond the Sri Lankan context. So thank you, Sujatha, and thank you for your presentation. Now I have a couple of questions. Now I said I shouldn't take too long on these. You've got to have your go as well, but I just can't help asking them. Now, Buddhism was ejected from South India largely before the crucial Gampala period that you study. But I wonder if the fact that Buddhism was strong in South India, and we have Buddhist texts and Buddhist narratives in Tamil, does this have any impact on your narrative?
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful response. I'm so grateful, Elizabeth, for first of all coming here and supporting my work, but also giving me that sense of that response, that sense of, I guess, description and that you shared with us about the book. But this question about South Indian Buddhism, I think we sort of hear from Anne Monier's imagining Buddhism in Tamil Nadu about the Viracholium, a grammatical text that has Buddhism invoked in it. But then we also have the South Indian Buddhist bronzes from Nagapattinam that some of you can see. One of them actually is displayed right now at the V&A. And when we look at contact between Sri Lanka, especially from Nagapattinam and Sri Lanka during the Chola period, we first of all, we have a sense that there is not much constructed in Sri Lanka, even though there is a temple on the northeastern coast, Rajaraja Perumpalli, which is a Buddhist temple. And the name Rajaraja Perumpalli, it's called Belgaum Vihara now, tells us that Rajaraja may have been a donor. Again, Nagapattinam had a similar Buddhist site. So there was patronage by Chola South Indian monarchs of certain Buddhist temples. But the bronzes tell a very interesting story in that when you look at the visual features, you can begin to see that there was certainly contact.
Cannot hear any sound at all.
Tirimale, which is east or northwest of Anuradhapura. And so I would say that certainly those exchanges that
There is no
existed before
sound.
the Gampala period surely would have continued, would have sustained further contact that we see with Silavansa Dhammakirti traveling to Danyakataka, Sri Danyakataka, which might be Amaravati, but of course Amaravati had at that point had stopped or had stopped functioning as a site at 1344. So I'm not entirely, I guess nobody entirely sure where exactly Sri Danyakataka would be in 1344, but certainly those previous contacts closer. That would help. Okay, would have certainly helped. I guess spur and sustain the sort of travels that were happening in
There
the
is no
14th
sound.
century. But it's a time period that we would love to know more about, especially about Buddhism in Sri Lanka during the Chola occupation. But it's really that one site, Rajaraja Perumpalli, and Nagapattinam in South India that might tell us a little bit more.
Cannot hear anything.
How Buddhism was considered by Chola kings. I don't know if that really answers your question, but hopefully it gives us some sense of, I guess, a place to think about what came before Kampala. Okay.
No, I think that was, yes, very helpful indeed. Because we are not completely talking about a Hindu or a South India, but the South India that had once had a very vibrant Buddhist culture and its relationship with Sri Lanka. Now, I don't think I'll go to my second question because I want to give people a chance to ask questions from the floor, and I'm told we should finish at 8:30. So yes, in the center here. Okay. I understand.
Hello, my name is Rohanta Fernando. You mentioned the colonial period, and you mentioned Haris Chandra, who is a sort of Buddhist nationalist, and Knighton, who was a teacher. But the main excavations at Polonnaruwa and Anuradhapura are by H.C. Bell, the main archaeologist. He's the one who excavated Lankapilaka, Tuparama, and both Hindu Devanas. And in his writing, he's completely fair-minded and academic and causing, then taking nationalists about Buddhism and Hindus. And same with some like S.M. Burroughs, who again was an early archaeologist. The main British archaeologists were pretty fair-minded, So I think you should say that the colonial period sort of were ultra Buddhist or Hindu. Yeah.
The people on Zoom said if you speak.
Oh, sorry. So I was asking what were H.C. Bell's writing and S.M. Burroughs' writing. I think they are pretty even-handed and fair-minded.
I think Bell tried to be fair-minded, but I wrote a chapter on Anuradhapura and Bell in my 2018 monograph, and I pointed out that he was certainly criticized by some Buddhist revivalists. He was not appreciated by all, but he probably was trying to be fair-minded.
Yes, I mean, anyone who works on Sri Lanka's art histories has to work on Bell's reports. We rely on them a lot, whether it's on working on Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, or his amazing sort of treatise on the Kerala district, right? But there are instances, I think, where you could sort of question Bell's assumptions, where Bell says that everything, for example, has been built during the Chola period or by the Chola kings, when in fact, when you start to sort of bring in the inscriptions and the chronicles and take sort of a more interdisciplinary approach, you begin to see a much more complex picture of these Hindu temples. But he's one of those few scholars who is fairly fair-minded. Any other questions for us, maybe from the online audience?
Who would like to ask a question, could they please raise their hand using the Zoom icon, and then we'll gather you into the conversation, please. Whilst we're waiting for that, I was just wondering, Sujatha, if I could ask you a question regarding contemporary Sri Lanka, in terms of these Buddhist temples and indeed Hindu temples now? How much are they shared experience and shared spaces, you think, given historical context in recent years, please?
Thank you, Amal. There are shared spaces still in Sri Lanka. I mean, if we think about a site like Kataragama, that is a shared space between, we've got Kirivihara there, a Buddhist stupa, we've got the Kataragama Devala, there's a Hindu temple, there's in fact a mosque as well. But one might think that's the exception, but if you start to really look around, you can see that there are other shared spaces as well. Right in the heart of Kandy, the Kandy Kataragama Devale is also a shared space where you have a Devale to the deity Kataragama, but then right beside it is a small Buddhist temple, and you have the Kapurala there is Hindu, is Tamil. He's not Sinhala Buddhist Kapurala. There's a history to that as well. And there's also Buddhist monks who reside in that space. But if you want to think of archaeological sites, not specifically only sort of living heritage sites, but archaeological sites, you can see this happening in archaeological sites as well. In Anuradhapura itself, we might think of Anuradhapura as mostly Sinhalese Buddhist city, but there are old Hindu kovils that have mostly now just stones and pillars that remain there, but there is one site not too far from Thuparama where there's a small devala that has been created from the old archaeological remains of a Hindu temple. So there are those interesting shared spaces as well. If we want to go further north, of course, when we took our students, we had the chance to take them to Jaffna as well. We thought that, we don't want to only limit our students' experiences and learning to only Buddhist sites and to World Heritage sites. We took them to Jaffna, and we had the chance to visit spaces that were shared spaces. Some are constructed heritage sites, like Nainativu, the Nagadipa site, which has barely any archaeological remains. Of course, we were reading Elizabeth's article as we were going there about the sites in the north. And if you just walk from Nagadipa just along the road, you find this amazing Hindu temple. And think of, it's these shared spaces in contemporary Sri Lanka still exist. Sometimes they are contested sites. And we also visited Dambakulapatna, where Sangamitta is believed to have landed, but it's a completely new Buddhist site. And just not too far from it, we saw this gigantic Shiva sculpture being created. So there are different types of shared spaces. There are spaces that seem to be along sort of history, where people have somewhat sort of negotiated those spaces, and while in other places it's more contested and fairly new. So I think it's kind of hard to give sort of a straight, clear answer to that, but it's a very complicated issue of shared spaces.
Yes, we can't see anything online.
Hi, Divya, can you ask your question, please?
Oh, okay, directly. Thank you. First, Dr. Meegama, thank you so much for this talk. We met about 10 years ago, and it has been ever inspiring. And I'm so glad to be able to lean on what you're saying. I thought I could ask a question that would move the conversation slightly in the direction of what I thought I heard you say, which had to do with different types of patrons, namely Buddhist monastics, for structures. And I wanted to actually focus in on the idea of monumentalization. It seems like you spoke about image houses or smaller temple models that were monumentalized into these bigger image houses at Apollonarava. I wonder, can you speak about monumentalization of other types of smaller possible triggers in this space and time, just a little bit, just to give us a sense of what exists?
Think, oh, it's working. Okay, thank you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for the question, Divya. So we have that, I guess, also, with these the monumental sort of aesthetic that we see in Sri Lanka and at this time period and slightly earlier, it's not necessarily only with image houses, but also with the stupas. That aesthetic is there in Anuradhapura with its gigantic stupas, which are probably the largest in the Buddhist world. And alongside that, I mean, that's sort of like the first phase of, I guess, monumentalism. And then we have the sculptures, right? This is something that I believe Pia Brankashri has worked on the various monumental Buddhas that you see throughout Sri Lanka. It's not just only Buddhas, but also Bodhisattvas. And of course, the third aspect would be the third, I guess, feature would be the monumental image houses. It's usually what scholars have tended to think is that it's connected to patronage. It's a way of, I guess, announcing one's power and piety to a large public and religious as well as lay community. But perhaps there are other ways to think about these monumental structures if we sort of think about, I guess, the larger Buddhist world where monumental structures were created. And I'm thinking of structures like Borobudur as well, but there's a huge sort of a very expanded form of a mandala, a gigantic mandala. So it's not just only specific to Sri Lanka. We see it in as part of the wider Buddhist world. We see gigantic Buddhist sculptures made in China and in Lungmen, in Japan at the Todaiji, a monumental bronze sculpture of the Buddha Vairochana, but also housed within one of the largest wooden structures in the world. So it's not something I would say that's specific to Sri Lanka, but that's something that's shared in this wider Buddhist world, and something really that one would want to sort of continue to think about as something that's seen throughout the Buddhist world.
Is there one last question from the floor or from Zoom? I think we.
Sadly, no, because it's so hard to get hold of them. It's published in the US. That's how I remember.
It's certainly worth reading if you can get hold of a copy. So Amar, are we going to close?
certainly email them out to people who join.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how to get back onto
Yeah.
that. It's a bit complicated. Oh, they have that one.
Yeah. Can the people on, we'll certainly send that out too. Okay, so I hope everyone can hear me. Sujatha, well, this has been a most stimulating evening, and I must thank Sujatha and Elizabeth for giving their utmost for us. The British Mahabodhi Society provides monthly lectures of this type. We try to do them on a hybrid basis or an online basis. And we will be looking at other types of events as the year progresses. We would like to look at the opportunity of offering the opportunity for people from Britain to travel to India specifically on pilgrimages. And I know I've had a small conversation with Sujatha on that. And I've just returned from India myself, and we're looking to put a team together to look at that. And indeed, if there are people out there who would like to contribute and volunteer to help us achieve that, that would be greatly appreciated. We are also seeking to, as you can see, improve the types of events that we're hosting at the Vihara in this 100th year. The talk that you've heard today would not have really happened without a team of dedicated helpers, particularly the audiovisual team, who have been spending several hours this week putting together this setup, this new setup. And indeed, a lot of credit should be going to some specific people like Rajita and Steve, Lanka and Rahul and Anusha for helping us achieve the level of expertise we want to achieve in our hybrid events. You will shortly be having some refreshments, and those have also been put together by a team of volunteers, and we really do appreciate and are blessed by the helpers that this Vihara attracts. And if you want to contribute in any other way towards helping this Vihara and the British Mahabodhi Society, please reach out to either the head monk or the leaders of the British Mahabodhi Society. In conclusion, I'd like to thank my co-directors at the British Mahabodhi Society, Dr. Nihal Veerasena, Sudanta Abekun, Rajiv Hevritana, Sudamika Hevritana. I would also like to thank today's help that I've received from Graham Dixon for doing the introductions today. Just a few other things that are coming up. In November, there will be, on the 15th of November to be specific, there will be a practitioners conference hosted at London Buddhist Vihara with the UK Association of Buddhist Studies, of which Elizabeth is the president. And that will be a one-day conference at the Vihara. I think they're still looking at the theme for it. There you are. It'll be something to do connected with consciousness. Thank you. So for those on Zoom who wouldn't have heard that, we're hoping to get, it'll be in collaboration with various traditions of Buddhism, including Tibetan Buddhism. And we will be, the theme of the conference will be on consciousness. Okay, I'd like to just formally close this event And Venerable Bogadasila Vimala would like to say a few words. Bhante.
A speech actually. I just stand here to invite you next Sunday, 11th in May. We celebrate the Buddha Day, Vesak Day. And in this year, Vesak Day is very special for us as we are celebrating in next year the centenary of the London Buddhist Vow. It's a very historic event. So therefore, in advance, we are going to inaugurate the centenary celebration on next Sunday, 11th. This is very special, as I have invited 25 monks to attend, and actually India, Thailand, Burma, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka, all the high commissioners, I expect they will be here for this inauguration ceremony. And monks will come from Japan. Japan means Japan tradition. The monks live in this country. They come, and Thai monks from Wimbledon and Amravati monks, and we all together do a chanting ceremony for this inauguration ceremony to give blessings to the Vihara and to the proceedings of this celebration. I would like to invite you, if you can, please turn up in the afternoon. Very important. At 3:30, we start the inauguration ceremony with the blessings chanting ceremony. So we would like to invite you, if you are free, please. And thank you for a wonderful speech, Sujatha. I've been to Gatladinya, but there is no any longer a Devaraja statue. There is a Vishnu statue. I think during the Cambrian period, they have converted that Devaraja, Upulwan Devala, into a Vaishnava, into a Vishnu Devala. Have you noticed that? Yeah. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Venerable Sila Vimala, for allowing our events to be hosted at the Vihara. Thank you so much. Okay, if you could just bear with us a few moments, we will get the refreshments out to you. Okay, thank you so much.